Book of Heaven, Volume 12. 18th to 22nd. March 1919. Page 107 to 112. March 18, 1919. In his conception, Jesus conceived all souls, their pains and their deaths. Continuing in my usual state, my always lovable Jesus, making himself seen, drew me into the immensity of his most holy will, in which he was showing, as though in act, his conception in the womb of the celestial Mama. O God, what an abyss of love! My sweet Jesus told me, "Daughter of my will, come to take part in the first deaths and pains that my little humanity received from my divinity in the act of my conception. As I was conceived, I conceived all souls with me, past, present and future, as my own life, and I also conceived all the pains and deaths which I had to suffer for each one of them. I had to incorporate everything within me, souls, pains and deaths, that each one was to suffer, in order to say to the Father, My Father, look no longer at the creature, but only at me. In me you will find everyone, and I will satisfy for all. As many pains as you want, I will give them to you. Do you want me to suffer death for each one? I will suffer it. I accept everything, provided you give life to all. This is why a divine power and will were needed in order to give me so many deaths and pains, and a divine power and will to make me suffer. And since in my will all souls and all things are in act, not in an abstract way, or by intention, as some might think. Rather, I kept all of them identified with me, in reality, and with me they formed my very life. In reality, I died for each one, and suffered the pains of all. It is true that it took a miracle of my omnipotence, the prodigy of my immense will. Without my will, my humanity could not have found and embraced all souls, nor could it die so many times. So, as my little humanity was conceived, it began to suffer alternating pains and deaths. All souls were swimming in me as if inside an immense sea, forming the members of my members, the blood of my blood, the heart of my heart. How many times did my Mama, taking the first place in my humanity, feel my pains and my deaths, and she died together with me. How sweet it was for me to find the echo of my love in the love of my Mama. These are profound mysteries, in which the human intellect, not able to understand well, seems to get lost. Therefore, come into my will, and take part in the deaths and in the pains that I suffered from the moment of my conception. From this, you will be able to better understand what I tell you. I am unable to say how, but I found myself in the womb of my Queen Mama, where I could see the tiny little infant Jesus. But, though tiny, he contained everything. A dart of light flashed from his heart into mine, and as it penetrated into me, I felt it giving me death, and as it came out, life came back to me. Each touch of that dart produced a most sharp pain, such that I felt undone, and dying, in reality. Then, through the same touch, I felt I was receiving life again. But I don't have the right words to express myself, therefore I stop here. March 20, 1919. The deaths and the pains which the divinity made the humanity of Jesus suffer for each soul, were not just an intention, but they were real. Luisa takes part in them. I felt my poor mind immersed in the pains of my lovable Jesus, and since I had been told that it seemed impossible that Jesus could suffer so many deaths and so many pains for each one, as is said above, my Jesus told me, "My daughter, my will contains the power of everything." It was enough that my will wanted it, for it to happen. And if it were not so, my will would have had a limit in its power, while I am without limits and infinite in all my things. Therefore, whatever I want, I do. Ah, how little I am understood by creatures, and therefore I am not loved. Come into my humanity, and I will let you see and touch with your hand what I have told you. In that moment I found myself in Jesus, who was inseparable from the divinity and from the eternal volition. By just wanting it, this volition created repeated deaths, innumerable pains, blows without scourges, the sharpest pricks without thorns, with such an ease, just as when, with one fiat, it created billions of stars. It did not take as many fiats, for as many created stars, one was enough. Yet, not just one star came out to the light, while the others remained in the divine mind or in its intention. Rather, all of them, in reality, came out, and each one had its own light to adorn our atmosphere. In the same way, it seemed that, in the heaven of the most holy humanity of our Lord, with its creative fiat, the divine volition created life and death as many times as it wanted. So, being in Jesus, I found myself at that point when Jesus suffered the scourging from the divine hands. It was enough for the eternal will to want it, and, without blows, without lashes, the flesh of the humanity of Jesus fell off in pieces. Deep furrows were formed, but in a harrowing manner, and in his most intimate parts. The obedience of Jesus to that divine volition was such that his humanity melted by itself, but in such a painful way that one can say that the scourging which he received from the Jews was the image and the shadow of that which he suffered from the eternal volition. Then, at the will of the divine volition, his humanity recomposed itself. This happened when he suffered deaths for each creature, and all the rest. I took part in these pains of Jesus, and, oh, how vividly did I understand that the divine volition can make us die as many times as it wants, and then give us life again. O God, these are unutterable things, excesses of love, profound mysteries, almost inconceivable to created mind. I felt unable to return to life, to the use of senses, to motion, after I suffered those pains, and my blessed Jesus told me, "Daughter of my will, my volition gave you those pains, and my volition gives back to you life, motion, and everything. I will call you often in my divinity to take part in the many deaths and pains which, in reality, I suffered for each soul. It is not, as some believe, that it was only in my will, or that I just had the intention of giving life to each one. False, false. They do not know the prodigy, the love and the power of my will. You, who have somehow known the reality of the many deaths suffered for all, do not put it in doubt, but love me, be grateful for all, and be ready when my will calls you." March 22, 1919. All things came out to life from the eternal fiat. Excesses of love in the creation of man. As I was in my usual state, I found myself outside of myself, and I could see all the order of created things. And my sweet Jesus told me, "My daughter, see what harmony, what order in all created things, and how all of them came out to life from the eternal fiat." Everything cost me a fiat. The most tiny star as well as the refulgent and splendid sun, the most tiny plant just as the great tree, the most tiny insect just as the largest animal, they all seem to say among themselves, "We are noble creatures. Our origin is the eternal volition. We all carry the mark of the supreme fiat. It is true that we are distinct and different from one another. We have diversity of office, of light, of heat, but this says nothing. One is our value, the fiat of a God. One our life and preservation, the fiat of the eternal majesty. Oh, how eloquently does creation speak of the power of my will, teaching that from the greatest thing to the smallest, one is the value, because they have life from the divine volition. In fact, a star would say to the sun, "It is true that you have much light and heat. Your office is great, your goods immense. The earth almost depends on you, so much so, that I do nothing in comparison to you. But the fiat of a God made you so. Therefore our values are equal, the glory which we give to our Creator is completely similar." Then he added in a more afflicted tone, "It was not so in creating man. It is true that his origin is my fiat, but this was not enough for me. Taken by excess of love, I breathed on him, wanting to infuse in him my own life. I endowed him with reason, I made him free, and I constituted him king of the whole creation. But man, ungrateful, how did he correspond to me? Amid all creation, he alone has become the sorrow of my heart, the clashing note. And then, how much could I tell you about my crafting in the sanctification of souls? Not only one fiat, not my breath, do I place at their disposal, but my very life, my love, my wisdom. Yet, how many rejections, how many defeats my love receives. Ah, my daughter, compassionate my hard sorrow, and come into my will to substitute for the love of the whole human family, so as to soothe my pierced heart.